Good evening, everyone. I'm Leslie Howerton. Thank you for joining us tonight for our Chat with a Planner series. I am the Master Planning Supervisor for the Down County Planning Division and for the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. So thanks for spending your evening with us. Tonight, our environmental planner, Tina Schneider, will be walking us through sustainable principles for making a downtown climate resilient while improving ecological diversity. Tina will give a brief presentation, and then we will have a group discussion, answer any questions, and get your feedback and comments. You can put your comments or questions in the chat while she's going through the presentation, and then we'll go through a question answer period at the end, as well as address any comments or get your ideas, thoughts, and feedback as well. I do want to mention we have 2 additional Chat with a Planner events coming up next week, one on affordable housing and one on placemaking for the future of the Civic Building area, Ellsworth Place, and Veterans Plaza. So we hope you'll join us for that, and you can register for those on our website. And at the end of the meeting, we can ask Lauren to drop the registration links in the chat as well. So thank you again. I'm going to turn it over to Tina Schneider, our fabulous environmental planner, and she's going to take you through her presentation.
Thank you, Leslie. Good evening, everybody. I'm just gonna make sure there we go. We could advance that. Okay, so thank you. I'm just working on 2 screens, so bear with me while I get oriented here. But I wanted to thank you all for coming and for your interest in the environmental portion of the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Community Plan. Tonight, we're going to go over a few of the environmental analysis that we did, and then a couple of ways in which we think that we can address some of the conditions. But most importantly, what we're here to do is hear from you. This is a chance for you to express your thoughts, your concerns, your ideas, and we're hoping to learn from you as well. So our analysis, which was done by myself and Saquon Gatling, who's also here and attending the meeting tonight. So that included standard environmental assessments, which you can see them on the far left, which are like the tree cover analysis, tree laws, air quality. We did all of those, plus knowing and recognizing that we're in an environmental crisis right now. We're having climate change. We're all very much aware of the changing conditions. And so we thought that it was really important to do additional analysis and just see what is happening right now in downtown Silver Spring, given the temperatures that we're dealing with and the conditions that we have. So we're going to go over a couple of those findings, not all of them, but a couple of them. And we're going to talk about the heat island effect, surface temperatures, tree loss in Silver Spring, some of the precipitation forecast, resiliency, and then some ideas that we have. And those are the things that we want feedback on, and your thoughts. So the first thing what we're going to do is talk a little bit about heat island effect. And so we gathered information that we obtained from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and that shows various microclimates, air temperatures in Silver Spring, and you can see that on the map right here. And the variations are due to things like impervious cover, the percent of impervious cover, tree canopy cover, the color of the impervious cover. So if it's roofs, and we'll go over that a little bit, materials, wind conditions, the temperature of the day. And I'm going to show you, we have made this map available to all of you, and that will be available in the chat. I'm going to bring that up. I think you all can see the screen right now. And this is available to you. And so what this is a heat island map, the one that that I showed you, and you could zoom in and out. And what that does is it allows you to see where it's hot. The dark red is where it's hottest, over 98 degrees. And the greens, oh, I'm sorry about that. It's a little finicky. The greens are the cooler areas. The yellows are somewhere in between. And what we could see is today I want to just zoom in as if you were playing this at home with this at home. And what you could see is like, okay, let's look over here where it's green. And what we'll do is we'll pan in to the green area. And as I said, I apologize, it's a little clunky. And then you could see what makes it green. So there's trees, it's residential area, and there's trees here. And if you wanted to scroll over and you could say, okay, what's going on here? This is really dark red. Let's look and see what's there. As you could see, when you scroll over, there's darker surface, there's a lot more impervious cover, and it's black, or the color of asphalt. And what's interesting to me is, so say for instance, you can all see my cursor, right? So this is yellow right in here. And when you pull the cursor over, you can see that that's a building with a white roof. So white or tan roof, what they reflect more. So they're not as hot as, say, a darker roof, which is in this area. You could see some of these darker roofs. So I found this pretty interesting. So we're going to flip back now. You can play with that for as long as you want. But that shows you kind of heat island effect. Now we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. We're going to go to the next slide, which is the next analysis that we did. And that next analysis is actually surface temperature. So we got the NOAA readings, which is the air temperature. And then we decided, well, but you know, sometimes the NOAA atmospheric temperatures is 40 feet up, 50 feet up, 100 feet up. And so we wanted to say, well, what is the pedestrian experience? What is actually happening on the street? So we used an infrared camera and we went to the different zones. So we went to the residential zones, we went to industrial zones, commercial zones, park zones, park areas. And then we looked at AstroTurf, which was actually, the AstroTurf was in Bethesda because we did not have any to look at in downtown Silver Spring. And that also, the findings on here, we took hundreds of readings, and the findings are also publicly available. They're also posted. And I'm going to go to cursor. There we go. I'm going to go to the website that you have. And it's going to look a little bit, it's going to look exactly like this, not a little bit, where you're going to see the boundaries. And on the far left, each of the dots is the date that we took the readings. Saquon and I worked together and we took the readings on blistering hot days. We were sweltering and melting last summer. And what you could do with this map is you could zoom in. So like, let's go back a little bit so you can see this residential area and you can see the commercial areas. So we decided to look really closely at that, and you could click on the dot. And it's a little bit hard to read, but there's two different pictures. So there's one which is the actual regular picture, and if you click the arrow, you get an infrared picture. And if you click on inside of that, you get the infrared readings. So it's 129 degrees on the street, 131 degrees on the sidewalk, and in the planting beds, it's 107 degrees, which is pretty hot. Now we're still working out the glitches on this, so I apologize, but if you wanted to switch back and go back and see the regular photo of this, you have to go back to the main screen, click the arrow, and then you could look at the actual picture. So here's the temperatures. So it's interesting to me that the brick sidewalk, the red brick sidewalk, was hotter than the black tar asphalt road, just by a little bit. But then you could see the shaded area, which is not this is a very small tree, but it's planted at least, so there's grass there, so it's cooler. And so then if you wanted to, we can zoom out a little bit and we could go to this residential street. And we can again click on that, and you could see that where it's shaded, it's 98 degrees, and on the road itself, it's 127 degrees. So these are significant differences. And then again, if you wanted to go and look at the infrared readings, you can click on that, and you could see the infrared readings. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint right now. And I highlighted some of the most significant differences. So you can see the playground. So the playground right now with the blue soft material that they have is 161 degrees, which is very hot. And that was different from the grass by a 45.4 degree temperature. So these are things that add to the stress of a community. This adds to the experience of the community, whether it's a walking experience, a biking experience, a shopping experience. It all adds up to like, how do users feel? And one thing I want to talk, I think I didn't include that, which was the temperatures changes in Silver Spring. So we know that, well, in the region, so we know it's getting hotter. So if it's this hot now, what's it going to be in 10, 15, 20 years? And then how do we address that? So in this plan, we want to tackle these problems, and then so that they become bearable and usable. So we also looked at tree canopy cover. And so you can see in the far left-hand side, the map on the left shows the residential tree canopy cover, which is 35.42. In the commercial areas, it's 88.85% canopy cover. And then in the industrial areas, it's 8.38%. And what we also noticed is in the years 2014, between 2014 and 2018, we lost 1.82% of the tree canopy cover in the commercial and in the industrial areas, not in the residential, in the commercial and industrial areas. And that's because it's growing. We all know that Silver Spring is changing and things are there's a lot of development happening here. So the next thing we looked at is we wanted to know that like trees are important. We all know that they're important. They cool our streets, they reduce heat island effect, they provide food and shelter for wildlife, but we wanted quantifiable science-driven data on exactly what's the performance of the trees in Silver Spring. How are they doing, and what are they providing for us? And so what we learned here is that there are, in Silver Spring, the majority of trees, 88% of the trees in Silver Spring are less than 18 inches in diameter. It's a pretty small tree. 12% are greater than 18 inches in diameter. And then we looked at, well, we used an iTree data collection system device, and we saw that we measured hundreds of trees, and we found that these trees, by far the larger trees, are the ones that are performing all the services that we love. They're the ones that are by far, and you can see that in the two columns, the two charts on the lower right-hand side, that the larger trees by far surpass in terms of carbon sequestration and carbon storage. They by far outperform the smaller trees. So that's knowledge right there. So, and then we also, it quantified the iTree tool, quantified the services in terms of financial benefits. So the trees, this is approximate, but it's driven mostly by science, which total performance benefits is over $4.32 million per year in terms of stormwater controls, as I said, the carbon sequestration, pollutant removal, and then benefits to the ecosystem. It's like over $4.32 million. So that's pretty good, but we can do better when we plant more trees. The next thing we looked at is stormwater. So we all know that things are changing in terms of rain as well. We're getting more severe rain. So this is a map that shows the Northeast, and we've gotten 71% an increase in precipitation just over the last 35 years. That's a lot of additional heavy precipitation. And the forecast in the lower left-hand corner, you could see that the forecast, though, on average, the rain right now is, we're getting, you know, a 2-3 inch storms. But what we're gonna see in time, oh, I'm sorry. I think part of this, I think the bottom is cut off. I apologize. But what we could see is that there's going to be an increase in precipitation. So how do we prepare for that? And that's one thing that this plan is going to look at is, are we prepared for that? And then, of course, all of this adds up to climate change and resiliency. So we know things are changing, you know, the situation, we now have a more clear understanding of what the impacts are in Silver Spring. And so what can we do? This is the first plan actually where we're looking at folding in resiliency. We're gonna do what we can in the construct of a sector plan to address some of the issues. We can't address all of them in a sector plan because it's many different departments in the county. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the most extreme one. So the Climate Action Plan, DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, determined that and the Hazardous Mitigation Plan identified the 3 top situations that we're going to be encountering in Silver Spring, and extreme temperatures is one of them. We talked about that, extreme precipitation, and actually drought. And so these are the things we're going to have high winds. We've already seen an uptick of that. Species loss because of the impact of habitat loss and all of these temperature changes, etc., and natural winds, but natural hazards. But the 3 top is extreme temperatures, precipitation, and drought. And so we want to become as resilient as possible. So what is resiliency? So it's the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to conditions, events, and disturbances related to climate change. So we are looking at things for this plan like emergency shelters, cooling centers, cooling shelters, and ways in which we can cool the streets. So that's why we took those readings, and now we know it's going to get hot. So our plan has to figure out how to cool the streets and cool the community. Looking at stormwater control, we're looking at whether or not, you know, during droughts, where's Silver Spring going to get its water from? Food security, we saw that during the pandemic that, you know, food was hard to come by, and where are the distribution centers and where can we go to get food in an emergency? And we want to increase biodiversity, energy, and some of these things that we're going to be looking at. So the first thing we thought about was heat, because that was where, to me, the most interesting and striking news was just how hot it really is in the summer. And if we know July and August is hot, and we know that in 20 years that June and September are going to be as hot, maybe not 20 years, but the forecast is between now and 50 years, June and September are going to be as hot as July and August. So that's 4 months out of a year where we're going to have really hot streets. Streetscapes are going to be hot. And so wanted to figure out how to cool that. So we received a grant from the Council of Government under the Transportation Land Use Connection Grant. And we got that, and they're going to fund, they awarded us a contract to look at, or not awarded us a contract, I'm sorry, they're paying for guidelines to identify cool ways in which we could cool a street. So it's going to be science-based sort of methodologies for mitigating urban heat island. And they're going to look at like the effects of the escalating temperatures, assess surface materials and colors, determine the emission rates of the materials, identify cool material options. How can we cool the streets? How can we maximize shade? How can we maximize cooling? And they're going to look at other ways in which we can cool the streets. And obviously tree planting is going to be one of them. So we're excited about that. That's going to really help us quite a lot. And then we also are thinking about nature-based solutions to these problems. So kind of along the lines of biophilia, or like problem solving through nature. And what does that mean exactly? So that means like when you integrate things like trees and vegetation, as we saw with the heat island, I mean the FLIR camera, the infrared lights, we saw that the tree, where the trees were, there was quite a difference in temperature. So, and where the vegetation is. So we want to try to green the community as much as possible. We want to shade some of the playgrounds. We're thinking about at least all of these things. Urban agriculture, which helps with the food emergencies. It helps to bring green into the community. It helps to improve soil, which sequesters more carbon when you have better nutrient-rich soils. And then we were looking at green roofs, and green roofs you probably have heard of and or probably know a lot about. They're roofs that have a surface material, a soil material on the top of that. So what that does is it can treat stormwater, but it also cools the roof too. So, and then it also provides habitat. So it's like a win-win all around. Maybe there's a fourth one too, which is provides another open space area for the community to go and hang out in and play on their on the roof, on the upper floor. And then stormwater management, which is the bioretention. So this planting bed right here is an example of, and so is this planting bed right here. So bioretention are ways in which, there are a few of them, and so we're spending there ways in which the stormwater is directed into these they're like planting beds with a deep substrate, and then the water goes into them and it filters the water. It cools the water before it's released. It slows the velocity down. And oftentimes it can trickle back down into the groundwater table, but in urban areas, it most frequently just slows it down. So it's a slow release into the stream bed versus a flush into the stream bed. Net zero buildings, we're looking at that. The county, under the climate action plan, they are working on making legislation that every building will have to be net zero by the year 2030. In the whole county, under the climate action plan, and the goal is to be entirely net zero by 2035. And that means that a net zero building is a building that doesn't draw energy from the system. It doesn't from the energy network. It creates its own energy on site. And then solar orientation. How do we orient buildings? And this is an interesting one. It's not so easy, but because there's a couple of different things. When you can orient to maximize the solar orientation, so you can put solar panels on it, and it could energize the building, you know, with the solar panels. But also, if you think about where are the shadows of the building going to be cast, and then how do you orient it to maximize the shadows so that you can cool the streets? And I think that's a really promising design element that we haven't really looked at yet, but I think we need to start, because we can see that different streets from those heat maps that you saw, and you can again look at them, different streets depending on the orientation and the solar casting onto the sidewalks and the shadow casting, you see a very significant temperature change. So that's it. And I just want to now open it up to you. You know, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas? What are your questions? Oh, Leslie, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you so
Yep.
much, Tina.
Yep.
We did have our first question in the chat that I just wanted to read out loud from Michael Gerwitz that we could answer. And his question was, how far back have you evaluated temperature readings over time as they correlate to increased density? And the second part of that question is, and have you made predictions for the future?
Ooh, we did not do, I'm not completely sure I understand the question in relation to density and temperatures. So like this was the first year, and actually the NOAA readings were the first time study that NOAA has done Silver Spring. So it does not go back very far. And the infrared readings, this was the first season that we did, or last summer was the first time we did that. So we don't have any backup data. All we have is the data from the temperatures, from climate temperatures, and NOAA has been monitoring the changes over time, regionally, locally, globally.
Right.
Does that answer?
And what Michael means about density is, I think what he's talking about is as over time, as development has increased in an area, when you're adding development, adding buildings, the temperature readings then would change over time versus if it was previously undeveloped area. So that's what he means by density.
Yes. We have not measured that over time, again, because this is the first year. That's one of the things that is interesting about the maps that we did show you, because you could see in the dense areas and the urbanized areas where it's hotter than the residential areas. So in a really like futuristic community, and actually it's not so futuristic, right? But DC is looking at this, Reston is looking at this, is how can those urbanized areas, the dense areas, perform and be cool and be dense in the same way that the residential areas are. And that's a goal. That's a design challenge. And that has to be, that could be a priority. It doesn't have to be, but it could be a priority, so that you start seeing. And there's names for all of this, which is like nature-based design, biophilia. It's how do you design a city that functions to cool the community and perform the services that they even say perform a forest service. Now, we're never going to get that far, but we can probably get to the residential areas.
Yeah, and as far as looking at future density for the area, we have not prepared our preliminary recommendations yet around the looking at zoning and land use in terms of density. So we wouldn't know that quite yet. It's a little early, but we will be working on that through the summer. So there was a question from Bill Wolf, Tina, that says, is the net zero goal for the 2030 for new construction or for all buildings, and I think he means including buildings that are already existing?
Great question. It's going to be, so the climate action plan right now is in draft form. And in the climate action plan, by 2035, every single building in the county, including all of our homes, will be net zero. So that's an amazing and very high reaching bar. First, they're going to start off with all new construction by the year 2030. And so that will have to be net zero. And then they're going to look at, subsidies, incentives. How can we get commercial realtors to change their heating and cooling, to change their insulation? How do we get residents to do that? What could we do? And it's going to be very expensive.
Okay, great. And I see Michael also has his hand up. So Michael, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Tina a question or make a comment if we didn't get it right.
Okay, well, thank you. You did get it right, but I would like to ask you another question, if I may.
Sure.
When I testified last year before the planning board about the proposal for the downtown Silver Spring and adjacent communities plan, I first started out by noting that Rachel Carson was a Silver Spring resident. She wrote, of course, Silent Spring. Yeah. And that when I moved to the Seven Oaks Evanswood neighborhood in 1999, in the one or so years that have passed since then, many more old, large trees have come down in the neighborhood, and I hear far fewer songbirds in the morning. So my question is with regard to the existing trees, old growth trees and old growth bushes in adjacent communities like mine, Seven Oaks, Evanswood, and how you are going to, excuse me, protect the environmental benefits that that vegetation provides, especially with regard not only to climate change and the other important issues that you mentioned, but with regard to wildlife habitat. As you know, that pollinator species are in critical decline throughout the world and this country. Songbirds are in critical decline. Insects in general are in critical decline, and a lot of that is due to loss of habitat. And in Seven Oaks, Evanswood, and I'm sure the other adjacent communities where there's a lot of old growth trees, a lot of old growth bushes, just a lot of greenery, they provide habitat for all of those species and other species. So moving forward with this plan, how is the planning board, how is the county going to protect the vegetation that provides these vital services?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I wish I had a great answer for you. My neighborhood is the same. I lament the loss, and a lot of times it's because of invasive species like English ivy, porcelainberry, Japanese honeysuckle. And then it's disease like the ambrosia beetle that knocked out just a ton of white oak trees 2 summers ago. And we're seeing more diseases that are coming and hitting these trees. And then also the trees are dying because they've never had to deal with these temperatures before. They are very stressed from the invasives and the temperatures. And then also they're stressed because they're not cared for in the same way. And a lot of that is on residential property. We can't tell residents what to do. Our parkland, we tried to do invasive control on parkland and try our best to protect parks. It's a battle, and I don't want to be doomsday. It's important that residents like yourself who care talk to other residents, and we'd like to one of the ideas that I've had is like maybe in our appendix we could have a section. I haven't even run this by Leslie yet or anybody, but maybe we could have a section that just talks about that, but it's really not, and Leslie, you could weigh in.
Sure.
It's not really a sector plan issue that I'm aware of.
Okay, with all due respect, you are correct about disease and climate change, but I'm talking specifically about development and how development is responsible for trees coming down and old growth bushes coming down. And that, since you are part of the county government, and this is a discussion about the plan for zoning and development, how are you going to protect what we have from development that threatens those old growth trees and bushes? That is within your area of responsibility.
I would say that, as Tina mentioned, if we're talking about the single family neighborhoods and trees and things on your property, that's, one thing, but trees and, old canopy, the great street trees that are within the right of way, that are maintained through the county, I think it's a great question and something we need to look at. And it's something we need to address. I think it's something we'll have to work with our county partners on, such as DEP, as well as DOT. But in terms of our recommendations, in terms of development, and for example, the Seven Oaks, Evanswood neighborhood, we're not going to be recommending any kind of additional density in terms of commercial, in terms of the commercial downtown or the commercial core expanding out into Seven Oaks, Evanswood. So we're not going to be proposing CR zones or increased density as such, where we would be providing new development. Now, there are other situations in the single family neighborhoods that arise and that happen today. And that's where single family homes are bought, and property owners who buy those older homes from the 40s and 50s, tear them down and do tear downs and put up a larger house that fills the extents of the lot. And they may tear down trees on that property in order to build that 3,000 square foot house that they sell for $1.5 million. And that's really gets into a different discussion, except that it does affect the vegetation in our neighborhoods, the reason we moved there, the old growth, the tree canopy, and all of that. And so I think it's a great question, Michael. We don't have a good answer for you right now, but I think Tina is and the team are looking at trying to find ways to talk about these things and address these things and provide some guidance to the planning board in this direction. So I thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think Jane Lyons had a comment in the chat, and Jane, I don't know if you have your hand up, but I wanted to ask your question. If I can find it here. Tina, Jane asked, is there a map of greenhouse gas emissions per household for the plan area?
That's a good idea. No, I wish I did. I wish we had it. I want a carbon footprint map, but here's we've tried that. I tried that in other plans. I worked on Bethesda plan, Montgomery Hills plan. And the thing is that in order to get the carbon footprint of a household, then PEPCO and WSSC, they have to, and Washington Gas, they have to give that information up. So they have to share how much you are using, how much energy and fossil fuels you are using, and they won't do that because it's a privacy issue. So in order for us to actually see individual housing footprints, we would need information that's not provided. Now, part of the climate action plan, this is going to be interesting to you because part of the climate action plan, right now, every building that's over 10,000 square feet has to benchmark. And what benchmarking is they have to hand over their energy demands to the Department of Permitting Services and show them how much energy they're consuming. And soon, if the climate action plan is approved as is, residents will have to do the same. And you may have to, then you could show how your energy is decreasing over time. And so it's in the future, but it's not present now.
Great. I think Brenda Freeman has her hand up. Brenda, go ahead.
Yes, I have a suggestion of Michael when he's talking about private homes. I live in Woodside Park, and the Woodside Park Civic Association has a so-called Tremendous program in which each year people put in an order and will order plants for them, trees, and then they plant them. Whereas this really doesn't address your concern and also mine about the old. It does keep a certain level of greenery and a canopy going in areas which are under threat. And this is also for bushes too. So I just wanted to mention a program like that, which is possible. And so if you're interested, if you want more information, I'm on the list service and I could put you in contact with a person here in Woodside Park that handles that program and can give you information. It's Jim Burke. Okay, that's all. I just wanted to make that.
Yeah,
Great,
thank you so much for that information. There's a lot of tree giveaways. We're trying to plant trees. The county is trying to plant trees as any place that people will plant them. Again, though, it does go back to that slide, which I found very interesting in our findings, which is the performance of older trees versus younger trees. So when an older, we plant a tree now, but it's not going to perform the services for 60 years or so. So that's a long time to wait. So the older trees are important. So as Leslie mentioned, we'll be looking at ways in which we could preserve whatever's left, or some of what's left, as much as possible.
Great, thank you. I see Lisa Kate has a comment in the chat. Is there a plan for increasing green public space being innovated in the upcoming plan?
We're not at the recommendations yet, so that we're gonna take
yeah.
your comment and that will be one of the we'll incorporate that. We're gonna be thinking about the recommendations. So that's one of the things tonight. If you guys have recommendations, please tell us right now, because that's what we're doing. We're collecting your thoughts.
Exactly. And Tina works directly with our parks planner as well on the Silver Spring plan. And so Tina, Saquon, and Christina, who presented last week, will be looking at public green space, parks, as well as the environment cohesively and working together and coming up with recommendations for that. I'm checking to see if anybody else had their hand up here. Saw somebody's hand pop up. Liz, you had a question or comment. Go ahead.
What I wanted to echo what Tina had said earlier about the fact that so much of the tree canopy in Silver Spring in particular is on private residential or commercial property, and really not under the control of either the parks or planning control. So I think what we're looking at here is a multifold process. A large part of is helping property owners understand the importance in their backyard and how critical understanding what kinds of trees we have in our yards, what kinds there are, and how we need to take care of them through pruning and maintenance and replanting if they're near the end of their lives, etc. How important that is in order to be a partner with parks, with planning, with the county, which has been proactive in so many ways to try to conserve mature trees as well as plant new trees. I think that the Conserve Montgomery and Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection program called the Tree Care 101 program is a great example of a neighborhood workshop that is helping people understand just what I've been talking about, and hopefully take back to their neighborhoods and work in their neighborhoods to help understand the value of these mature trees, as Tina was saying, that already have those values in place, that we don't have to wait 60 years for them to produce those values. So the long and the short, and I'm sorry to carry on so long, the long and the short is the county and property owners and the urban downtown area needs to work hard to save the mature trees as much as possible. And if that means also strengthening our environmental laws in the county, I think that should be considered as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thanks a lot. And so the tree care program that you mentioned, that's under DEP, because I didn't know about that.
Yes, it's in partnership with, it's in partnership with the Conservation Montgomery.
Okay.
And DEP.
Well, that's great to know.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as we were saying earlier, I like that idea, and maybe we could put that in the appendix. We could figure out ways in which we could think about how to help the residents in the residential areas to and think about their existing trees to help be a part of the preservation effort. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Brenda, did you have any other comments, or is your hand still up from last time? Just wanted to check.
I do.
Go ahead.
This is, it's not essentially about trees, but it's something that I've noticed is that the county in many of the medians along, say, Colesville Road and parts of Georgia Avenue, I often see people using gas-powered mowers cutting grass. And I've often thought it would be much better if they just planted perennial plants that would cut down on the gas fumes. It would probably be much healthier environment, healthier environmentally, but also reduce that type of noise and danger. For me, at least, when I'm driving down the street, I try to make sure I'm not in the lane that is closest to where the median is when they're doing that work. That's all I have to say, and I'm going to try to put my hand down.
Oh,
Thank you, Brenda.
I love that idea, Brenda. You know, those medians are perfect for wildlife. We could create wildlife meadows. We could create stratified plantings. We could have shrubs. We can have canopy covers. They could be little islands. They could be stormwater management facilities. And we're not seeing enough of that. And I think we need citizen activism on that, because it's not park and planning. And we can advocate for it, and that will definitely certainly be a part of it. And thank you so much for your comments. Please continue to advocate for that. A lot of time it's State Highway Administration, or Department of Environmental, DOT, Department of Environmental, DOT, Department of Transportation. So, yeah, so we're in a collaboration mode and a mind shifting, a shape shifting right now. I think that people need to start thinking about that, and we're working to achieve that. And thank you again for the comment.
Yeah. Tina, Mel had a comment that I just wanted to read. He said, your observation that careful orientation of a building can provide temperature reducing shadow and shade raises a possibility to allow or encourage taller buildings in the commercial area to use the buildings themselves to shade the sidewalks and roads. Something to remember and think about as we're looking at the plan and looking at zoning limits. So I think that was a very good comment.
Yep. Yep.
I'm just looking through the comments here, and feel free if you have a question, jump in while I'm looking through the comments. Don't be shy.
I'll start again.
Go ahead.
One thing that I've noticed when I look at the map of the region is that the Sligo Creek Park is a very narrow watershed in terms of what appears as green on either side of the creek. And when I think about the future, 10, 20, 50 years into the future, climate change and the increasing temperatures, there are two things that greatly alarm me. One is what Tina had talked about in her slide presentation about the increasing heat island issue of Silver Spring, which is not, we have to work very hard, it would seem, to mitigate. And think about the donut surrounding Silver Spring, which would include the adjacent neighborhoods. as a critically important area for not just mature trees and new plants, but also other kinds of plants. Greenery in general will be necessary to mitigate this heat problem in the future. And the other critical thing is Sligo Creek watershed.
Mhm.
And the biodiversity question of the watershed itself. We've been extremely fortunate to have biodiversity, kind of unusual for an urban suburban area so close to an urban downtown. And I think it's succeeded to date because the tree canopy that extends into the neighborhoods is actually part of the buffer zone of Sligo Creek Park. And we need to make sure that that continues to happen. Even though it's not a formal watershed, it needs to essentially, it needs to be more formally acknowledged. And again, the education of people who live on either side of that watershed or within the watershed need to be educated about their role and responsibility for, if they want to continue to the viability and hopefully to make it thrive, not just survive, what needs to be done. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. It certainly is, because it acts as cooling, right? And then so it cools the buffer of Sligo Creek, and there's lots of stormwater. What we want to do is improve stormwater discharge to Sligo Creek. I remember when I first moved to the area, the Center for Watershed Protection, Tom Schuler, was working on one of the pioneers in the country for stormwater management. He was one of the early pioneers who pretty much invented it. And one of the first places that they started was Sligo Creek. So they did some great work, and we need to continue on that.
Yeah, definitely. Jane Lyons had a comment in the chat I wanted to read. It said, part of the vision in Thrive 2050, and Tina worked on this as well, is to turn dangerous arterial roads into multimodal green boulevards. How can this plan move that transformation forward in downtown Silver Spring?
Leslie, maybe you could answer that.
No, I think it's a great comment. You know, we're going to be looking at you know, our corridors and our arterials throughout the downtown. We're going to be working with, you know, Tina and John Markland, our urban designer, on the plan. We'll be looking at streetscapes and looking at how we can maybe green some of those areas, whether or not they're boulevards. You know, that remains to be seen, but that's something that they're going to be looking at. And as part of, you know, that idea of green boulevards and kind of the multimodal aspect of these streets, you know, we do have the Silver Spring Streetscape Standards that were recently approved, but they're a living document. And so we want to update those standards as we go through this plan and make any of the necessary innovative changes, add new tools and different things like that. And so in addition to the grant that Tina received for this plan for the Cool Streets Guidelines, you know, that's exactly something that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be taking those general plan, the Thrive 2050 goals and themes, and seeing how we can implement them and make the, you know, appropriate recommendations so that we can transform downtown Silver Spring. So I think yes to all. It's a great idea, and we will be looking at that as a team. We don't have the answer right now, but that's what the team is going to spend all summer doing. So it's a great comment. And Mel just seconded, I think everybody is seconding Brenda's idea, and that it's time to work with SHA and DOT to create a program for neighbors to take over a traffic island or a circle for planting and maintaining. And Mel, our longtime resident here and business property owner, has also, he's been here to see this and has seen that DOT, something like 40 years ago, modeled on something of Rehoboth, allowed to beautify the highway into a town. So there's some other ideas there as well, Tina, that as you work with DOT, SHA, and DEP, those are some conversations we can start up again.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? Anything that I missed? Feel free to jump in. We want to make sure everybody's got an opportunity. Michael, your hand's up again. Go ahead.
Thank you. We have a group of volunteers in my neighborhood called the Water Watchdogs. You might be familiar with them. And they basically monitor pollution going into Sligo Creek stream, or rather the creek. And almost every few weeks, there's another report of some sort of pollution, some sort of funny color or, foam, some sort of runoff getting into Sligo Creek. So as downtown Silver Spring, as more buildings go up and more development goes up, and, all the things that go with that, water pipes, sewage, electrical, that sort of thing. Do you know if the county has any plans to increase enforcement of its pollution laws so that we don't see an increase in the kind of toxic runoff that's making its way down to Sligo Creek?
Yeah, I can answer that. The good thing is that new development is very different than development was 20 years ago, even, and 30, and of course 50 and 80. And so what we're seeing is the older buildings have infrastructure problems, cracked pipes, sometimes combined sewer, sometimes the lines are direct discharge. They have no stormwater management controls. So these older buildings are oftentimes, the problem is that, they're just old systems. And they're failing. So the new buildings have new regulations that they have to comply with. They have to do stormwater on site. So a site now that has no treatment, if it's redeveloped, it's going to have stormwater treatment. So it's going to end up being performing better in terms of stormwater runoff than it was before development. Not that I'm advocating for, we can save the trees and we can develop on the site, but we can get more stormwater management. And then also for some of the discharge, I live on Sligo Creek. And so I too see these disturbing sewer line breaks because the WSSC sewer line is parallel to Sligo Creek. So they've got to the county has to spend some money on that. And I wish we could make, residential houses comply with newer standards, but that's not something we could do. But it's a good point, and thank you.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions? Lauren, how are we doing on time?
It's about 8 o'clock right now, so
So I think we had 15 minutes more scheduled for this, but we
Great.
can wrap up.
Yep.
No, I want to give everybody the opportunity. I just wasn't sure if it was 8 or 8:15.
Yeah, no problem. I do think Brenda's hand is up, although it may be up from before. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Brenda,
No,
is there something else?
No, this is Brenda, and I can't.
It's
Oh,
okay,
okay.
Brenda. You can just
It's
click on
disappeared.
Okay.
No problem.
So I'm just, but my hand is not up.
You're totally fine, Brenda. You're perfect.
Okay.
We just want to make sure we're not skipping over anybody. That's all.
And I just want to say that I'm always available. You can write to myself, you can write to Leslie, you can write to Lauren. All of us share comments, and then yeah, if you have ideas, thoughts, please keep them coming, because your comments do matter, and your support matters greatly.
And I'll just add real
Leslie,
quick. Go ahead, Mel.
Tina, is that interactive heat island map going to be available to us all?
We put the link in the chat.
Oh, good.
to both
Good.
the heat island map as well as the surface temperatures. Both Lauren and I dropped in a link. So make sure you get that. If not, we can send it out via email. Definitely. And while we're wrapping up, I'll just kind of let everybody know where we are in the process in case you haven't followed along with some of our other meetings. So right now we're in the visioning phase. And so in April, and I know a lot of you on this call attended our visioning sessions, our visioning workshops. So thanks for that. This month, as I mentioned, the team is working on their internal visioning, basically learning everything that they heard from you, taking all of that in, downloading that information, and working through our internal visioning for the team, as well as doing these chat with the planner series, excuse me. As I mentioned, we have 2 more coming up next week, so we can drop those in the link as well to register for those. And our schedule kind of moving forward is we're going to spend the summer continuing through the visioning process, listening to all of you. We're going to be reaching out to stakeholders that we previously met with during the existing conditions. And then we're hoping to have a working draft for the planning board sometime in the late fall. But we will be coming back to you with some of our preliminary recommendations. And we will have a briefing to the planning board, just so you know, that summarizes the visioning that we did in April with all of you and provides a summary for them of what we heard from the community and what some of the key takeaways that came out of the visioning sessions. So that'll be coming up in June as well. So it looks like Lauren has put some information in the chat. You can contact Tina for anything environmental in this plan, or also about the Cool Streets Guidelines grant, which is really exciting. I just want to let everybody know Tina wrote that grant, knowing the importance for Silver Spring, and the Washington Council of Governments selected us as one of 11, I believe. So, you know, hopefully sometime in September, we'll have a consultant on board that will start to work on this Cool Streets Guidelines for Silver Spring. And that the hope is that we, you know, we'll be able to apply a lot of this to other parts of the county as well. So thank you, Tina, for that.
Welcome.
All right, if nobody else has any questions, we want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Tina, thank you so much for a great presentation. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to Tina. Again, we're in the visioning stage, so nothing is set. We don't have recommendations. We want to hear your thoughts and ideas. And we will be doing our best to tie everything back into the Thrive 2050 overarching goals that have been set for us. So thanks for coming tonight.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.